The ocean was calm that morning. Too calm, like it was holding its breath. At the far end of the San Pedro Naval Base, an old man stood near the dock. His back was straight, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The name tag on his faded jacket read, Walter Kane. He looked out at the sea, the same way he had 50 years ago, only this time no ship waited for him. Just the wind and the quiet rhythm of the waves. "Sir, visitors aren't allowed beyond this point," said a young officer, walking toward him. Kane turned slowly. His eyes were pale blue, like cold steel. "I'm not a visitor," he said softly. "I'm coming home." The officer hesitated. Something in the old man's tone made him pause. But before he could reply, another voice echoed from the deck. "Let him stay," said a woman in uniform. Commander Laura Monroe, captain of the submarine USS Colorado. "He's earned it." The officer saluted and stepped aside. Kane gave a small nod of gratitude and kept walking, each step deliberate, as if every sound of his boots carried memories the ocean still remembered. Up on the carrier USS Roosevelt, Admiral Richard Harlow stood surrounded by his staff. The deck was ready for the fleet memorial ceremony. Speeches, cameras, flags, fluttering in perfect symmetry. When he spotted the old sailor at the dock below, his jaw tightened. "Who let that man onto my base?" "Sir, he's a retired chief petty officer," said one of the aides. "Walter Kane, submarine division, served during the Cold War." "Then he belongs in a museum, not on my deck," Harlow snapped. He didn't notice that many of the younger sailors were watching Kane with quiet curiosity. They'd heard the stories. A man who once guided a crippled submarine back from under the Arctic ice. But legends had no place in a world run by protocols. When the ceremony began, everything went according to plan. Polished speeches, formal applause, a show of unity. Until a distant sound broke the script. A deep, resonant horn. Everyone froze. Out on the horizon, a dark shape cut through the waves. It was a submarine, the USS Colorado, surfacing right next to the carrier without clearance. "Who authorized that?" barked Harlow. No one answered. The sub kept rising, its black hull gleaming under the California sun. Then, as if choreographed, a line of sailors appeared on top of it, standing at attention. At the front was Commander Monroe, her posture flawless. She raised her hand to her temple. "Chief Walter Kane," her voice rang through the base loudspeakers. "On behalf of the United States Navy, we salute you." Then came the sound. Sharp, echoing, unmistakable. A 3-gun salute. The base went silent. Every sailor turned toward the old man. Even the gulls seemed to stop midair. Kane stood motionless. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand in return, his salute steady, though his fingers trembled. He didn't smile, didn't cry. He just stood there, a man made of iron and memory, facing the sea that had taken so much, and given him everything. Admiral Harlow's face darkened. "This is unauthorized," he muttered. "Shut that damn ceremony down." But no one moved. No one dared interrupt what they were witnessing. Down below, Kane's eyes glistened as the sound of the final salute faded into the wind. He lowered his hand. "Thank you," he whispered. Monroe looked toward him, her voice, softer now, transmitted through a private channel. "It's good to see you again, sir." Kane's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Didn't think I'd still be around to see your command, kid." "You taught me how to lead," she said, "and how to listen to the sea." He chuckled quietly. "The sea doesn't speak to everyone. It only talks to those who've learned to lose." For a moment, even the Admiral's staff stood still, unsure whether they were witnessing defiance or history. Harlow turned to his communications officer. "I want every camera off. Right now. But it was too late. Someone had already streamed it live to the internal network. By the time Harlow realized, hundreds of sailors across the fleet were watching. Kane looked up at the admiral's deck. 50 years, he said quietly, as if speaking to the wind. And still, the sea remembers. He stepped closer to the water, his reflection rippling against the hull of the submarine. For one brief second, he saw not an old man, but a young officer in a white cap, standing tall, his face untouched by time. The sound of waves drowned in silence. Then came the voice of Admiral Harlow, cold and sharp. "End this nonsense," he ordered, "before I remind everyone what discipline means." But when he looked down again, Kane was gone. He hadn't left. He'd simply walked past the line of guards and into the hangar, heading toward the heart of the base. And in that moment, something began. Something Harlow couldn't control anymore. Because the base had remembered. And memory was stronger than any rank. The hallways of the base felt different that night. Silent. Heavy. Whispers followed the old sailor like smoke. "Is that really him?" "They say he saved a submarine under the Arctic ice." "Yeah, and now he cleans floors at the docks." "What a fall." Walter Kane walked past them, not hearing, not caring. His boots echoed against the metal floor. Steady, deliberate, like he was still marching with his crew. He reached the end of the corridor where the door read, "Admiral Richard Harlow, Command Office." He knocked once and entered. Harlow stood behind his desk, the American flag glowing faintly in the window light. "You again," he said dryly. "I thought you'd learned your place." Kane's eyes narrowed. "I have," he said, "and it's not behind your orders." Harlow's voice sharpened. "You've embarrassed this command. You broke every protocol, paraded yourself like a hero, and now—" "I didn't parade anything," interrupted Kane. "Your people did when they remembered what honor looked like." A dangerous silence filled the room. Harlow leaned forward. "You think you're some kind of symbol? You're just a man who couldn't let go of the past." Kane's tone stayed calm, but his words cut deeper. "Maybe, but at least I didn't forget who I was when I took off the uniform." For a long second, neither spoke. Then Harlow's composure cracked. Just a flicker. He motioned to the guards. "Escort him off my base, permanently." The two Marines moved forward. Kane didn't resist. He just looked at Harlow one last time. "You can erase me from your reports, Admiral," he said softly, "but not from the sea." They let him out. Commander Monroe caught up with him outside. "Sir, please, let me talk to him." "You don't have to do this." Kane smiled faintly. "I do, Laura. I've been running from this base for half a century. I came back to finish what started here." "What are you talking about?" she asked. He handed her a folded paper, edges yellowed, ink fading. It was an old Navy mission report, stamped classified. At the top, USS Nautilus, 1958, Operation Arctic Passage. Monroe's eyes widened. "You were there," Kane nodded. "And so was he, Harlow. Fresh out of the academy, a communications officer, the one who sent the wrong coordinates." She stared at him. "That mission. It almost killed half the crew." He looked toward the horizon. "Almost did. But it wasn't the cold that got them. It was pride." That night, Monroe couldn't sleep. She sat in her quarters, replaying the words. If what Kane said was true, then Harlow had been hiding a mistake for decades, one that cost lives. She opened the old report under the dim cabin light. Most of it was blacked out, but at the bottom, barely visible, was a signature. "Approved by Lieutenant Harlow." Her heartbeat quickened. She grabbed her tablet, accessing the Navy archives, but every file on Operation Arctic Passage was locked. Restricted. Delta 4 clearance. That level was reserved for Pentagon staff. She sat back in her chair. If the truth came out, it wouldn't just destroy Harlow's reputation. It would shake the Navy itself. Meanwhile, Kane walked along the empty docks, his hand brushing the metal railing like an old friend. The air was sharp with salt and diesel. He looked at his reflection in the water, a face lined by time, but not by regret. A low rumble echoed from below the surface. Then, faintly, the sonar ping of a submarine offshore. He smiled. "Still there," he whispered. "Still listening." He reached into his coat and pulled out a cassette tape, marked only by a date. March 12th, 1958. He pressed play. Static. Then voices. Panicked, distant, echoing through decades. "Reactor pressure rising! Coordinates lost. We're under the ice. Communications down. Sir, we're blind." And then his own voice. Younger, steadier. "Stay calm. Follow my signal. Keep the nose north by 10 degrees. We're not done yet." The tape ended with silence. Kane stood there, looking at the waves, as if expecting them to answer. He could almost hear the crew again, the men he'd lost. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Soon, boys, they'll know." At that same hour, Admiral Harlow received a secure call. The line clicked twice before connecting. "This is Delta Command," a deep voice said. "We've been alerted that a civilian, named Walter Kane, has accessed restricted material from a 1958 operation. Is that correct?" Harlow's jaw tightened. "Yes, but it's under control." "Handle it quietly, Admiral. The Pentagon doesn't want ghosts from that mission walking around. You understand?" "I do." "Good. Make sure he disappears. Quietly." The line went dead. Harlow stared at the receiver for a long time. Outside, the sea was black and still. He muttered to himself, "You should have stayed buried, old man." Far from the command tower, Monroe's screen blinked with a message she didn't send. An encrypted file appeared. From unknown source. Inside, an audio clip. She hit play. A man's voice came through, old but firm. "Laura, if you're hearing this, I may not be around long. The truth is deeper than the sea. Find the one called Delta Nautilus. It's the only proof left." It was Kane's voice. She exhaled sharply, her hand trembling. He knew what he was walking into. And by dawn, she realized he wasn't just here to confront the past. He was here to bury it properly. By morning, the base was restless. Rumors spread like fire. The old sailor was missing. Some said he'd been escorted out of town. Others whispered he'd vanished near the docks before sunrise. Only one person knew better, Commander Laura Monroe. She found a letter slipped under her cabin door. 3 words. "Meet me tonight." No signature, no location, just coordinates written in pencil. The Northern Pier, 2200 hours. Her pulse quickened. The Northern Pier was off limits. An old supply zone, closed since the Cold War. The same pier used by USS Nautilus. Night fell like a curtain. Fog crawled in from the sea, swallowing the lights one by one. Monroe walked alone, her boots crunching on the wet concrete. Ahead, under the skeletal frame of a rusted crane, a figure stood, motionless. "Chief Kane?" she called quietly. The man turned. The dim light caught the lines on his face, the shadows under his eyes. He looked like he'd been awake for a century. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "You asked me to." He nodded slowly. "I needed someone who still believes this uniform means something." "What's going on, sir? You're not safe here." He smiled faintly. "None of us are, Laura. Not anymore." He handed her a small, waterproof case. Inside, an old naval badge and a second cassette tape. "This," he said, "is the truth Harlow buried." "What's on it?" Kane looked out to the black horizon. "The confession of a man who didn't survive the mission, the one who saw everything." Monroe swallowed hard. "Why give it to me?" "Because you'll know what to do with it when I'm gone." Far away, on the upper deck of the command tower, Admiral Harlow watched the security feed. Two dots glowed on the screen, near the northern pier. "Of course," he muttered. He grabbed his coat and turned to his aide. "No backup, no reports. This ends tonight." Down by the pier, the fog thickened. Kane heard the footsteps before he saw the figure. "I told you to stay off my base," said Harlow, his voice cutting through the mist. Kane didn't move. "Still your base, huh? After all these years, you still think the sea belongs to you?" "It belongs to order," Harlow replied. "And you—" He took a step closer. "You're chaos. You always were." Kane's eyes didn't waver. "Funny. I remember chaos being the only reason you made it out alive in '58. For the first time, Harlow's mask cracked. "Watch your mouth, old man." Monroe's voice broke in, steady but trembling. "Sir, please. This isn't the way." "Stay out of this, Commander," barked Harlow. Kane held out the tape. "This is what you're afraid of, isn't it?" Harlow froze. Kane pressed play. The sound of the Arctic wind filled the air, distorted by static. Then came a man's voice. Young, desperate, scared. "Lieutenant Harlow, sir! We've lost the coordinates. We're heading straight into the ridge." Then another voice, calm but breaking. Kane's. "Hold the line, damn it! Shut down the forward tanks." The recording crackled. "Sir, we need orders." "Lieutenant, what do we do?" And then silence, followed by the sound of rushing water and screaming metal. Monroe covered her mouth. Kane stopped the tape. "You froze," he said quietly. "And because you froze, 23 men drowned under the ice." Harlow's face turned pale. "You think I don't remember," he whispered. "I was 22. I watched them die." Kane stepped closer. "And you spent 50 years pretending it never happened." Harlow's voice trembled. "I followed orders." "No," Kane said. "You followed fear." For a moment no one spoke. Only the waves filled the silence, slow, heavy, endless. Then Harlow's composure shattered. He lunged forward, grabbed the cassette, and hurled it into the water. "There! It's gone! No one will ever hear it!" Kane stared at the dark surface. "You still don't get it," he said. "The sea doesn't forget." He turned to leave, but Harlow drew his service pistol. "Stop! Right there!" Monroe gasped. "Sir! This is madness!" "Stand down!" Harlow shouted. Kane turned slowly, facing the gun. "You going to shoot me, Richard?" 50 years too late." "You brought this on yourself!" Kane took a step forward. "If you pull that trigger, you'll prove everything I said. You'll prove you're still afraid." The gun trembled in Harlow's hand. Rain started to fall, tapping softly against the metal railings. For a long second, he didn't move. Then, the pistol lowered. Kane nodded. "Good. Maybe there's still a sailor left in you after all." He turned again and disappeared into the fog. Monroe ran after him, but when she reached the end of the pier, he was gone. Only the waves moved, dark and calm. She stood there for a moment, breathing hard. Then she noticed something glinting on the ground. The naval badge he'd given her. On the back, engraved words, "The sea keeps what the world forgets." She closed her hand around it, and in that moment, she knew this wasn't over. The next morning, a small Navy tugboat found something floating near the docks. A waterproof case. Inside, the tape, intact. And as Monroe listened to it, later that night, her eyes filled with something that wasn't sadness. It was fire. The truth was no longer buried, and the sea, once again, had spoken. The storm hit at dawn. Rain hammered the steel decks, and thunder rolled like distant artillery. By mid-morning, the entire base knew. Someone had leaked the recording. The sound of Kane's voice at Breer and the screams of Nautilus echoed through phones, halls, and offices across the fleet. No one knew how it got out, but everyone knew what it meant. The Navy had been hiding a tragedy. Admiral Harlow sat in his office, head in his hands. The rain outside blurred the flag on his window into gray streaks. His aide burst in, breathless. "Sir, the Pentagon's calling. They want an explanation." Harlow didn't look up. "What do they want me to say? That a ghost exposed us?" The aide hesitated. "Sir, with respect—" "The men are talking. They think Kane was right." Harlow's eyes flashed. "They think he was right because I let him live long enough to talk." He stood abruptly, slamming his hands on the desk. "Get me Commander Monroe." Monroe entered minutes later, still soaked from the storm. She didn't salute. Harlow glared at her. "You knew. You helped him." "I didn't leak it," she said. "But I won't apologize for what he did. You disobeyed a direct chain of command." "I followed a higher one," she shot back. "Honor." He froze. The word hit harder than a bullet. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he said quietly. "The fleet's in chaos. The media's tearing us apart. You've destroyed the chain that holds us together." Monroe took a breath. "No, sir. We just reminded them why that chain exists in the first place." By evening, the base was surrounded by cameras. Reporters shouted questions through the rain. Who was Walter Kane? Why was his service record erased? Did the Navy cover up a fatal error? The press office had no answers. Inside, sailors stood in silence watching the broadcast on every screen. Old veterans who once kept quiet were now speaking out. The name Walter Kane was trending across the country. That night, Monroe received another message. Anonymous. Untraceable. Just coordinates again, the same pier. When she arrived, the fog was thicker than before, but this time, she wasn't alone. Dozens of sailors stood there in silence. Some young, some gray-haired, some civilians now, all waiting. A single candle flickered near the edge of the pier. Beside it, a folded Navy cap. She recognized it instantly. "He's gone," whispered one of the men. Monroe knelt and picked up the cap. It was damp, heavy. Something was inside. She unfolded it, and a small, brass tag fell into her hand. Walter Kane, CPO, USS Nautilus. Her throat tightened. Someone stepped forward. It was the base chaplain. He looked at her and nodded. "He didn't drown," he said softly. "He went back where he belonged." Monroe turned toward the ocean. Out in the fog, a faint red light blinked once. Then again. The old emergency signal. The kind used by submarines long retired. It pulsed 3 times, then vanished. She stood there for a long time, rain dripping from her cap, the tag clutched in her palm. 2 weeks later, a military inquiry convened in Washington. Admiral Harlow sat before the tribunal, his medals gleaming under cold fluorescent light. The prosecutor's voice was sharp. "Admiral, do you deny altering the official report of Operation Arctic Passage?" Harlow didn't answer. "Do you deny ordering the destruction of evidence related to the incident?" Silence. Monroe watched from the back of the room. She wasn't supposed to be there, but no one stopped her. After a long pause, Harlow finally spoke. "I don't deny it." Murmurs rippled through the room. He looked up, not at the prosecutor, but at Monroe. "I was young," he said. "Afraid. I thought leadership meant hiding mistakes." His voice trembled. "I was wrong." Outside, after the hearing, Monroe stood on the steps, the wind tugging at her uniform. A young sailor approached. "Ma'am, I served under Harlow. I used to think men like Kane were just stories." She nodded. "Now you know better." He looked toward the sky. "Do you think he's really gone?" Monroe smiled faintly. "No. The sea doesn't keep the good ones forever. It just holds them until we remember." She handed him the brass tag. "Keep it, Pass it on when it's your turn. The sailor took it with reverence. Weeks passed. The storm subsided. And at dawn, the USS Colorado left port, gliding across the silver water. On its conning tower, someone had painted a single phrase: "The sea remembers." Monroe stood on deck as the coastline faded behind her. Somewhere beneath those same waters, Kane's last salute still echoed, unseen but eternal. The radio crackled softly. A voice came through faint, almost like a memory. "Chief Kane to command. Coordinates confirmed. All ahead slow." Monroe closed her eyes and whispered into the mic, "Copy that, Chief. We're still listening." And then, only the hum of the sea remained.